The morning Nora Callum left, she carried everything she owned in a single duffel bag. $43 in her coat pocket. The door locked behind her before she reached the end of the drive. She was 19 years old, and the people who were supposed to keep her had decided, without ceremony, that they were finished. She walked to the road. She did not look back. Some departures are not dramatic. Some are just a door, a gravel drive, and the sound of nothing following you. 6 weeks later, a letter found her at the address of a friend who barely had room for one. It came from an attorney in Harlan County, typed on plain letterhead, 3 short paragraphs. A woman named Delia Marsh had died. Delia Marsh had left something behind. And the letter named Nora, her full name, her birth name, the one her mother had given her, as the sole person meant to receive it. Nora had met Delia twice, both times at funerals. She would not have said they knew each other. Delia, it turned out, had known her for years. There is a kind of care that asks nothing in return and announces itself to no one. It does not need to be witnessed to be real. Delia Marsh had spent decades in a small town on County Road 41, running a candy shop on a road that most people only pass through, and she had spent those same decades watching, helping, and keeping quiet about both. The shop had been closed for 11 years by the time Nora arrived. The sign was still there, faded under 2 layers of old paint. And on the front step, recently placed, not dusty, not weathered, a clean welcome mat. What Nora found inside that building would take days to fully understand. Not because it was complicated, because it was patient. Because it had been waiting, specifically, deliberately, with a precision that felt almost impossible. For her. Behind a false shelf panel, beneath the main counter, past a locked room on a floor no one had climbed to since 1962. There was a cedar chest with dovetail joints and a sealed envelope written in a hand Nora had never seen before, but somehow recognized. And inside that chest, folded under banded bills and a lifetime of careful silence, was the reason a woman she barely knew had chosen her above everyone else. This is a story about what gets left behind on purpose, about the difference between being abandoned and being aimed, set loose in a particular direction by someone who understood the road ahead better than you did. Nora Callum arrived in Caulfield with $43, a borrowed truck, and no plan. She left months later with something harder to name than money or property or even a place to stay. She left with the knowledge that someone had been watching out for her long before she knew she needed it. That is the kind of thing that changes how a person stands in a room. And it started with a padlock, a pry bar, and a note in an old cash box that read, "This is not the real one." The duffel bag was a dark green canvas, military surplus, with a broken zipper on the left pocket that Nora had fixed twice with a safety pin. It held 3 pairs of jeans, 5 shirts, a wool sweater her mother had bought at a church sale the winter before she got sick, a toothbrush, and a paperback with the spine cracked so badly the pages had started to come loose. That was everything. She had looked around the room before she left, the way a person does when they are trying to decide if they have forgotten something. And then she understood that there was nothing left to forget. The room had never really been hers. She zipped the bag, lifted it by the strap, and walked out. It was early March, and the cold came off the fields in low, flat waves. The driveway was gravel, about 40 feet from the side door to the road, and Nora's boots were thin-soled and not made for the season. She heard the lock turn behind her before she reached the truck. Not her truck, the household truck, which she was not permitted to take. And the sound was small and clean and final, the way a period sounds at the end of a sentence that has already been decided. She did not pause. She did not look back at the house. She walked to the road and turned left, because left was toward the county line, and the county line was toward anything else. Her stepmother, Bev, had not raised her voice. That was the part Nora would think about later, lying on the pull-out sofa at her friend Carla's apartment in Denton, staring at a water stain on the ceiling. Bev had come into the kitchen the night before, set a folded paper on the table beside Nora's coffee cup, and said, in a tone she might have used to discuss a utility bill, that it would be best if Nora made other arrangements before the end of the week. The paper was a list of local shelters. Nora had not picked it up. She had sat with both hands around the mug until it went cold, and then she had gone upstairs and started packing. Bev's son, Marcus, had watched from the hallway. He was 23 and did not say anything. Neither did she. She had $43. 28 of it was from a jar she kept on the windowsill, money she had saved in 1s and 5s from shifts at the diner on Route 9 where she'd worked the dinner hour since she was 17. The other 15 came from returning a pair of boots she had bought in January and not yet worn. Boots she had been saving toward for 6 weeks and had worn out of the store and then taken back the next morning because she saw, suddenly and clearly, that she might need the cash more than the warmth. She had kept the receipt folded in her coat pocket since then. She did not know why. She had known, perhaps, without naming it. Carla Briggs lived in a ground-floor apartment on the east side of Denton with a roommate who worked nights and a second-hand couch that pulled out into a mattress with a bar down the middle that pressed into your spine if you slept wrong. Nora stayed there for 6 weeks. She picked up extra shifts at the diner 3 nights a week and spent the rest of the time looking at listings for rooms for rent in towns within driving distance. Most of them wanted first and last month's rent. Some wanted references. She had neither. She kept a notebook where she wrote down every dollar she spent, every dollar she made, a column on each side of the page. And she checked the balance every morning before she got up, the way some people check the weather. The number moved slowly. It moved in the right direction, but slowly. The letter arrived on a Thursday, which Nora would remember, because Thursday was her day off, and she had spent the morning at the laundromat on Birch Street, watching her clothes turn in the drum and thinking about nothing in particular. Carla had left it on the kitchen counter, propped against the sugar bowl, with a sticky note that said only, "Looks official." The envelope was cream-colored, heavier paper than she was used to, with a return address in Harlan County and a name she did not immediately recognize. Elwood Fitch, attorney at law. She made coffee before she opened it. She was not sure why. Maybe she wanted to be sitting down with something warm in her hands before she read whatever it said. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first identified the attorney and his purpose. The second informed Nora that a woman named Delia Marsh of Caulfield had died on February the 11th and had named Nora as the sole beneficiary of her estate, including a commercial property at 417 Main Road in Caulfield and any and all contents therein. The third paragraph gave a phone number and asked Nora to be in touch at her earliest convenience to begin the process of transferring the deed. She read it twice. Then she set it on the counter and drank half her coffee before she picked it up again. Delia Marsh. She pulled the name up slowly, the way you pull up a plant by the root, carefully, to see what is attached. A great-aunt. Her mother's aunt, which made her a great-aunt at 1 remove, or perhaps 2. Nora had never been clear on how those calculations worked. She had met Delia at her grandfather's funeral when Nora was 11, and again at her mother's when she was 16. At the grandfather's funeral, Delia had pressed a $5 bill into her hand and told her she had her mother's eyes. At her mother's, Delia had stood at the edge of the room in a gray coat and had not spoken much to anyone. But when Nora had come out of the bathroom and found herself standing alone in the hallway, Delia had appeared beside her and placed a hand briefly on her shoulder. She had not said anything. Nora had not said anything either. They had stood there for a moment in the hallway of the funeral home, and then people had come back and the moment had closed. She called the number the next morning. Elwood Fitch had a measured voice, unhurried. the voice of a man who had delivered news of this kind many times and had learned not to rush any of it. He confirmed what the letter said. He told her the property had been vacant for 11 years, since Delia closed the shop in the spring of the year. Nora turned 8. He told her there were 2 keys, which he held in his office, and that she could collect them whenever she was ready to make the drive. He told her one other thing before he hung up, and he said it the way you say something when you have been asked to pass it along, and you are not entirely sure what it means. Delia had left a note in the file. He said, "Separate from the will." Just a single line that he was instructed to mention when he first spoke to the beneficiary. The note said there was a locked cabinet beneath the main counter of the shop. It said no one had opened it in 11 years. It said it was meant for Nora. What Nora knew about Delia Marsh could fit on half a note card. She knew the gray coat. She knew the hand on the shoulder in the funeral home hallway. She knew that Delia had run a candy shop somewhere in the eastern part of the state, in a town small enough that no one in the family ever visited, and that she had done so for most of her adult life. She knew that Delia had never married, had no children, and had appeared at family occasions the way certain relatives do, reliably, quietly, without requiring anything from anyone. She knew that after her mother died, she had not seen Delia again. She had assumed, in the vague way you assume things about people who exist at the edges of your life, that Delia was simply still out there somewhere, getting older, tending to her own business. She had not known Delia was watching. That was the part that sat with Nora in the days after the phone call, while she was still sleeping on Carla's pullout and writing her daily columns of numbers in the notebook. She had not known that someone at the edge of her life had been paying attention to the center of it. There was no way to verify this yet. The letter had not said as much, and Elwood Fitch had not elaborated. But the fact of the will itself said something. You do not leave your property to a great niece you met twice at funerals unless you have been thinking about her. You do not file a handwritten will at the county courthouse, naming a 19-year-old girl by her full birth name, unless you made that decision deliberately, over time, with something specific in mind. Nora went to the library on Friday afternoon and used one of the public computers to search for Delia Marsh in Caulfield. What came back was thin, a brief mention in a county business registry listing the shop as Marsh Confections, established in 1968 at 417 Main Road, Caulfield. An even briefer notice in a digitized local paper from 12 years back. A single line in the business closing section. Marsh Confections, Main Road, closed after 34 years of operation. No reason given. No quote from Delia. No photograph. The notice ran between an announcement about a farm equipment auction and a reminder about the county road resurfacing schedule. It took up less space than either of those things. She searched for Delia's name alone, without the town. Nothing useful came back. No obituary that she could find online, though Elwood Fitch had mentioned that a notice had run in the Harlan County Courier in the 3rd week of February, by which point Nora had already been 3 weeks into her stay on Carla's couch and was not reading the Harlan County Courier. She tried searching for the shop name, Marsh Confections, without the county attached. One result, a comment on a local history message board, posted 6 years earlier by someone using the handle Desert Rose 1949, who wrote only, "Anybody remember the candy shop in Caulfield? The woman who ran it used to give out free bags of mixed penny candy to kids who came in after school. Haven't seen anything like that since." The comment had 2 replies, both brief, both fond. No one had followed up after that. Caulfield itself was the kind of town that appeared on maps but not in conversation. Population 812, according to the county website, which had last been updated 3 years prior. It sat at the junction of Route 9 and County Road 41, an hour and 20 minutes east of Denton if the roads were clear. Longer if weather had come through and the county hadn't gotten to the salt trucks yet. There was a grain elevator, a volunteer fire department, a post office that shared a building with a small insurance agency, a diner called Patty's that appeared to have been in operation since at least the 1980s based on the photograph on their website, and a dollar store that had opened in the past decade and which, based on the satellite view Nora pulled up, appeared to be the newest building in town by a significant margin. Delia had moved to Caulfield in her early 20s according to a brief family history Nora's mother had kept in a shoebox that Nora still had, tucked into the bottom of the green duffel bag along with a few photographs. The shoebox held letters, mostly, and a few folded documents, a marriage certificate, a baptismal record, a hand-drawn family tree on the back of a paper grocery bag that Nora's grandmother had made sometime in the 1970s. Delia appeared on the family tree in her grandmother's careful cursive, connected by a line to Nora's great-grandfather on her mother's side. Beside Delia's name, her grandmother had written, "Moved east, has a shop." That was the annotation. The entirety of it. Moved east, has a shop. Nora's mother had spoken of Delia occasionally, in the way she spoke of most things from her own childhood, with a kind of fond compression, the way memory simplifies what was once complicated. She said Delia was the steady one. She said that when things were difficult in the family, when there were arguments or money troubles, or the kind of slow seasonal grief that runs through certain families like a crack in plaster, Delia was the one who did not raise her voice and did not take sides, and did not require anyone to explain themselves. She brought food, her mother said. When things were bad, Delia showed up with food. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just put something on the table and sat down. Her mother had said this in the tone of someone describing a kind of behavior so rare it was almost foreign, something to be noted and preserved. Nora had been 8 when Marsh Confections closed. She had no memory of ever visiting the shop, though it was possible. Her mother had taken her east once or twice to visit family, and Caulfield was not far from some of those relatives. She tried to remember if she had ever stood at a glass counter and looked at jars of penny candy, but nothing came. What she had instead was the shape of a woman in a gray coat standing at the edge of a room, watching, keeping her counsel, taking up no more space than necessary and leaving no mark on the occasion except the quiet, steady fact of her presence. Elwood Fitch had mailed a packet of documents to Carla's address. The deed, a summary of the estate, and a handwritten cover note from Delia that was separate from the formal will, and which the attorney had included at Delia's instruction. The cover note was short. It said, "The shop is in poor condition but sound. The roof was replaced 8 years ago. There is something under the counter that I want you to find before anyone else does. Do not bring anyone with you the first time." Nora read it standing at the kitchen counter while Carla's roommate slept in the next room. She read it twice, then she folded it back along its original creases and placed it inside the shoebox, beside the paper grocery bag with the family tree, beside the line that said "Moved east, has a shop." She closed the lid. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. Nora borrowed the truck from Carla's cousin, a man named Pete, who worked at a tire shop on the south end of Denton, and who asked no questions beyond when she needed it and when she would have it back. It was a 1994 Chevrolet Silverado in a faded shade of burgundy that had gone slightly pink at the roof from years of sun. The passenger side mirror was held on with 2 hose clamps and a strip of electrical tape. The heater worked on high only. She put $22 of gas in it at the station on Route 9 and checked the oil with a rag she found behind the seat. And when the oil read low, she added a quart from the case Pete kept in the truck bed, because he had told her she might need to. She pulled out of Denton on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of March, with the 2 keys from Elwood Fitch's office on the seat beside her, inside a plain white envelope, and the shoebox on the floor of the passenger side where she could see it. Route 9 ran east through country that started flat and got gradually more interesting, the land lifting and folding as it moved toward the older part of the state, the part that predated the interstate system and still showed it. She passed through 2 small cities in the first 40 minutes, the kind with a hospital and a chain grocery and a high school with a football field visible from the highway, and then the exits thinned and the signs changed character, advertising things that were increasingly local and increasingly specific. A particular auction barn, a particular feed and grain, a diner whose sign promised the best biscuits in the county and meant only that county. The sky was low and white, not threatening, just closed. The kind of sky that makes distance feel longer. She turned south off Route 9 onto County Road 41, just past a cluster of metal grain bins, at a crossroads with no other landmark. The road changed immediately, paved but narrower, with no center line and shoulders that softened into gravel at the edges, the kind of road that had been built for the county's purposes and not the traveler's comfort. The speed limit dropped to 35, but the road itself encouraged slower. There were places where the asphalt had heaved from winter frost and been patched with material, a slightly different color, so that the surface had a quilted look. Repair laid over original. Decades of maintenance compressed into a single plane. She drove carefully. Pete's truck had a shimmy above 50 that she did not want to test on uncertain ground. The last gas station was 40 minutes back. She had noted it when she passed it, the way her mother had taught her to note such things on long drives in unfamiliar country. Fuel, food, phone. The station had been open, a light on inside, a single pump island. But she had not stopped because she did not need to, and because stopping would have felt like hesitation, and she was trying not to hesitate. The road continued south, and the power lines that had followed Route 9 thinned here to a single run of wire on older poles, some of them leaning slightly. And then after another few miles, even those disappeared, cutting west toward a cluster of farmsteads she could see in the middle distance, leaving the road ahead. Without them, the world had a stripped quality, less of everything, and what remained was plainer. She passed a farm with a hand-lettered sign for eggs and honey, both words spelled correctly. The sign weathered to the point where the lettering had gone soft at the edges. She passed a concrete block building with no windows and no sign that might have been a machine shop or a storage facility, or something that had been neither for a long time. She passed a church with 12 cars in the lot on a Tuesday morning, which she noted without drawing conclusions. The road surface changed again where a section of county work had been done recently. Smoother, darker, the new asphalt ending abruptly where the budget had run out, the old surface resuming with a jolt she felt through the steering wheel and up into her shoulders. She slowed further. The town, according to the atlas page she had torn out and folded in her coat pocket, was 3 miles on. Caulfield arrived without announcing itself. There was no sign at the town line, or if there had been one, it was gone. The road simply became a street, and the fields on either side gave way to lots, some with houses, some with the kind of structures that serve purposes too various to name from the outside. A post office, as the county website had promised, sharing a low brick building with an insurance agency whose hours were posted on a paper sign in the window. A volunteer fire station with 2 bay doors, both closed, an American flag on a pole in the concrete apron out front, moving slightly in a wind she had not felt out on the open road. A grain elevator 2 blocks east, the tallest structure visible from anywhere in town, its corrugated metal sides the color of old bone. She found Main Road by following the town's logic, which was not complicated. There were 4 streets that could reasonably be called streets, and Main Road was the one that ran through the middle of everything and came out the other side. The commercial strip, if it could be called that, was 4 blocks long. There was Patty's Diner, which had a light on, and 2 vehicles parked in front and which smelled of bacon grease faintly even through the truck's closed windows. There was a hardware store that appeared to be open, and a building that had been a pharmacy and was now something else or nothing, its sign removed and the brackets still on the facade. And at the far end of the second block, on the left side of the road, at 417, there was a building she recognized from the satellite image she had studied at the library. It was narrow and deep, a storefront from the era when storefronts were built by hand and built to last. Brick construction, with a wide front window, boarded from the inside with plywood that had gone gray at the edges. The hand-lettered sign above the window was still there, ghosted under 2 coats of paint that had not been sufficient. She could read Marsh beneath the surface, and below that, Confections, in a style of lettering that had not been fashionable since before Nora was born. There was a padlock on the front door, heavy, closed. There were leaves piled against the base of the building from the previous fall, brown and compressed against the brick. There was a downspout on the right side that had come loose at the upper bracket and pulled away from the wall at an angle, catching wind. Everything about the building said closed and time and gone. Except the mat. It was in front of the door, centered, a plain brown choir mat, the kind sold in hardware stores for a few dollars with no pattern and no message. It was not weathered. It was not faded. It had the particular newness of something placed recently, within weeks, perhaps within days. The leaves had not piled against it the way they had against the base of the brick wall. It sat there in the cold morning light, clean and dry, and exactly where a mat is supposed to be, outside a door that no one had opened in 11 years. Nora sat in the truck for a moment with the engine running. Then she turned the key. She picked up the white envelope from the seat beside her. She got out. The first key was for the padlock. It was a heavier key than she expected, brass with a bow worn smooth from years of handling before the shop closed, and then smooth in a different way from sitting untouched in Elwood Fitch's desk drawer for 11 years. She fitted it into the lock and turned it, and the shackle released with a sound that was louder than she anticipated in the still morning air, a clean metallic snap that seemed to carry down the empty block. She pulled the padlock free, hung it open on the hasp, and stood for a moment with her hand on the door. The wood had swollen slightly in the frame from years of weather cycling without anyone to address it. She put her shoulder into it and it gave, not dramatically, just a slow, reluctant surrender. And the smell came out first. Old sugar, cedar, something underneath that she could not name precisely. But that was close to the smell of a cedar chest left closed for a decade. Compressed time. The interior atmosphere of a place that had been sealed and left to itself. She stepped inside and left the door open behind her. The light that came in was thin and gray, filtered through the boarded window and the open door, enough to see by if she gave her eyes a moment. The room was longer than it appeared from outside, the storefront narrowing toward the back where a doorway led to what she assumed was the stockroom, and behind that the back apartment where Delia had lived. The floor was wide plank hardwood, oak probably, dusty now, and in places slightly warped near the front where weather had gotten under the door over the years, but solid, no soft spots when she tested her weight across the first few boards. Someone had built this floor to last, and it had. The display case ran the length of the left wall, 6 feet of glass-fronted cabinetry with a hinged top and a mirrored back, the kind of case that had once held penny candy in small labeled compartments, root beer barrels, horehound drops, ribbon candy, the particular inventory of a shop that served a town where children had a nickel and an afternoon. The glass was filmed with dust but uncracked. The interior was empty except for a few paper labels still adhered to the bottom, their ink faded to the point where the words were suggestion rather than text. Nora ran her finger along the outside of the case and looked at the dust that came up on her fingertip, and then wiped it on her jeans. She moved further in. The Hobart mixer was bolted to a long wooden counter on the right side of the room. A commercial unit, older than anything she had seen in a working kitchen. Its bowl absent, but its arm and attachments still in place, coated in a fine layer of the same dust that covered everything. The model plate on the side read N50, and the cord was wound and tucked under the base with a care that spoke of someone who had always put things away properly, even at the end. Beside the Hobart, on a shelf above the counter, there were rows of apothecary jars, clear glass, various sizes, each with a ground glass stopper still seated in its neck. They were empty. They had been washed before the shop closed. She could see that from how they sat, inverted to drain, and then left that way. And the drying marks on the interior glass were from water, not from whatever they had held before. Delia had cleaned up before she left. She had not simply walked away. The register was at the end of the right counter, a manual unit, the kind with large round keys and a hand crank on the side, the kind that rang a bell when the drawer opened. Nora pressed one of the keys experimentally, and it moved under her finger with a stiffness from years of disuse, but it moved, and the mechanism inside made a sound like it was considering the question. The drawer was open and empty, as registers always are when a business closes. The drawer left open to show any overnight visitor that there was nothing inside worth taking. She had seen this in every closed-up place she had ever been. It was a kind of universal sign, the open, empty drawer, a gesture of transparency after the fact. She found the false shelf panel by accident. She had crouched behind the main counter to look at the underside of the display case, checking the construction, running her hand along the frame where it met the floor, and her knuckle caught on something that did not match the surrounding wood. A vertical panel, set slightly proud of the counter's back frame, with a small gap at one edge where the fit had loosened over the years. She pressed it. It did not move. She pressed harder at the corner and felt a slight give, a hinge or a catch somewhere in the construction. She stood and looked around the room, and then she went out to the truck and came back with the pry bar she had put in the truck bed before she left Denton, because Pete had said it was there and she had thought she might need it without knowing exactly why. The pry bar was a 30-inch S-twing, painted red, with a straight end and a curved claw. She worked the straight end into the gap at the edge of the panel, slowly, not wanting to split the wood unnecessarily, working it in a 1/4 inch at a time and applying pressure in stages. The panel resisted. It had been set and perhaps sealed, not with anything formal, just with time and compression and the slight swelling of wood in a closed space over 11 years. She worked the bar further in and leaned into it, and the panel came with a sound that was mostly the sound of wood releasing wood, a low drawn-out crack that ended in a soft pop. And behind it was a steel cash box, roughly 12 inches by 8, bolted to the underside of the counter frame with 2 3/8-inch lag screws run through a mounting plate. The second key was smaller, a flat steel key with no manufacturer markings, the kind cut from a blank at a hardware counter. She fitted it into the cash box lock and turned it and felt the internal mechanism shift, and then the lid released. Inside, a stack of bills, old, held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle and broke when she lifted the stack. She counted it on the counter with the bills laid flat. $211 in 5s and 10s and a small number of 1s, the denomination mix of a cash register drawer at the end of a business day. Underneath the bills, folded once, was a piece of lined paper torn from a wire-bound notebook. The handwriting was the same as the cover note Elwood Fitch had included in the mailed packet, the same careful, slightly compressed cursive. She unfolded it and read it standing behind the counter in the gray light coming through the open door. It said, "This is not the real one." And below that, in the same hand, a single additional line. "Go to the back. Find the door behind the shelves. Use the key Gus has." Nora stood with the paper in both hands. She read it a third time. She did not know who Gus was. She looked at the stockroom doorway at the back of the shop, dark beyond the threshold. And then she looked at the open front door and the street outside, quiet in the mid-morning, no one visible in either direction. She folded the note and put it in her coat pocket with the keys. She did not move for a moment. Then she pressed the lid of the cash box closed and heard the latch engage, and she stood up straight. And she went to find out who Gus was. The house across the road was a white clapboard, 2 stories, with a covered porch that ran the full width of the front and a woodpile stacked under a lean-to on the south side that was tall enough and deep enough to suggest a man who took winters seriously and had been doing so for a long time. There was a light on in the back of the house, visible through a side window, and a half-ton Ford pickup in the drive, older than Pete's Silverado and in better condition, which told her something about the man who kept it. She crossed the road and went up the porch steps and knocked on the frame of the screen door. She heard movement inside, unhurried, the sound of someone setting something down, and then the sound of boots on a wooden floor. And then the inner door opened and a man looked at her through the screen. He was 71 or thereabouts, broad through the shoulders, in the way of men who had worked physically their whole lives and had not stopped, with a face that had taken a great deal of weather and settled into itself comfortably. He wore canvas work pants and a flannel shirt, both clean, both worn. He looked at her without particular surprise, the way people in small towns look at strangers when they have had time to see a strange vehicle parked across the road and to form a preliminary theory about it. He did not open the screen door immediately. He just looked at her for a moment, measuring something she could not identify. "I'm looking for Gus," she said. He studied her for another second. "You'd be the one from the attorney," he said. It was not a question. He pushed the screen door open and held it. "I'll get my coat." His name was Gus Petrie. He had lived across from the shop for 31 years, longer than it had been closed, long enough that he had a complete memory of it as a working place, as a lit window on winter mornings and the smell of sugar in summer when Delia propped the front door open, as a part of the daily texture of the street that had simply been absent for 11 years, the way a tooth is absent after an extraction, the space still defined by the shape of the thing that used to be there. He did not say all of this at once. He said almost none of it immediately. What he did was go to the lean-to and pick up an armload of split oak, red oak by the look of the grain, cut to 18-inch lengths and well-seasoned, the ends of the splits showing the gray of wood that has had at least a year to dry. And he carried it across the road without being asked and without explaining why, and set it down inside the front door of the shop on the hardwood floor, stacking it against the wall with the automatic efficiency of a man who has been stacking wood since before Nora was born. She watched him do this. She did not offer to help, because it was clear he did not need help. And she did not ask why he was doing it, because it was equally clear that he was doing it because it needed doing, and he had decided to do it. When the armload was stacked, he straightened up and looked around the interior of the shop the way a person looks at a room they have not entered in a long time, taking inventory without making a production of it, noting what had changed and what had not. He ran his hand along the top of the display case, not checking for dust, just touching it. He looked at the Hobart. He looked at the open door behind the counter where the panel was still pulled away. "She kept it up as long as she could," he said. He was not talking about the shop's appearance. He meant something more general than that, and Nora understood it without requiring elaboration. She nodded. He moved to the front of the shop and stood looking out through the gap between the boarded window and the door frame at the street outside, his hands in his coat pockets. He was quiet for long enough that it stopped being uncomfortable and became something else. Just 2 people in a room with the weight of the place around them, neither one needing to fill it. "She talked about you," he said eventually. "Not often. She wasn't a woman who talked about people often, but she mentioned you by name, maybe 3 or 4 times over the years. After your mother passed, she mentioned you more." He turned from the window. "She didn't explain it. Delia didn't explain things. She just said she was keeping an eye on the situation. Nora thought about that. Keeping an eye on the situation was the kind of phrase that could mean many things, and she was not yet ready to ask which thing Delia had meant by it, partly because she was not sure she was ready to hear the full answer in a cold, empty room on a Tuesday morning when she had only just arrived. She looked at the stockroom doorway instead. She asked him about the back, about the second floor, about whether he knew of a door behind the shelves in the stockroom. He did know. He had known for years, he said, the way you know things about a building you have looked at from across the road for 3 decades. He had seen Delia go up there early in the years when the shop was still running. She had stopped going up before the shop closed. He did not know exactly when. And after the shop closed, she had mentioned it to him only once, standing on his porch in the fall, the last fall before she died, when she had told him that the upstairs room was sealed and that it had been sealed for a long time and that she had left instructions for who was to open it. She had told him she had put a key in her mailbox, addressed to no one, and she had asked him, without quite asking, to make sure it stayed there. He reached into his coat pocket and produced the key. It was on a plain steel ring with no fob, a single flat key, longer than the cash box key, with a more complex bit that suggested a deadbolt rather than a simple interior lock. He held it out to her across the space between them, and she took it from his hand. And he let go of it without ceremony, the way you hand something to the person it belongs to. She turned it over in her palm. It was cold from his pocket and slightly heavier than it looked. "She replaced the roof 8 years ago," he said. "I watched them do it. She hired a crew from over in Millard County, 4 men. Took them 3 days. She paid them in cash, I assume, because I never saw a check, and because that was how Delia did things." He moved toward the door. "The room up there is dry. Whatever she left, it'll be in the condition she left it." He paused at the threshold, one hand on the door frame, and looked back at her. "You need anything? There's a light on across the road. I'm usually there." She said, "Thank you." He said nothing to that, which was itself a kind of response. The response of a man who does not consider what he has done to be a transaction requiring acknowledgement. He went back across the road. She heard his boots on his porch steps, and then the inner door, and then nothing. She stood in the shop with the key in one hand and the note from the cash box in the other, the wood stacked against the wall, the smell of the fresh split oak mixing now with the old sugar and the cedar of the closed-up space. The stockroom doorway was dark beyond the threshold. She took out her flashlight and clicked it on and walked toward it. The stockroom was narrow and ran the full depth of the building, maybe 30 feet from the doorway at the front to the exterior wall at the back. Metal shelving units lined both sides, the industrial kind with adjustable brackets and particle board shelves, most of them empty, a few holding the remnants of inventory, boxes of wax paper bags, a case of glass jars with no lids, a stack of cardboard candy boxes still flat and banded, their printed graphics faded to soft approximations of what they had once been. The floor was the same oak as the front room, but had not been finished. Raw wood that had absorbed years of foot traffic and spills and the general atmosphere of a working storage space, and had taken on a color that was neither brown nor gray, but something in between. Nora moved the flashlight beam across the shelves methodically, left side to right side, front to back, the way you read a room when you are looking for something specific but are not yet certain what form it will take. The door was behind the last shelving unit on the right side, set into the back corner of the wall. The shelving unit was bolted to the wall at 2 points and had not been moved in a long time. There were 4 small circles of slightly cleaner floor where the feet of the unit had stood, and the floor beyond them, between the unit and the corner, was dustier than the rest. Undisturbed dust of the particular density that accumulates over years rather than months. She pulled at the unit and it resisted, the bolt at the top catching, and she worked it out from the wall at the base first. rocking it forward 2 inches at a time until the bolt at the top pulled free of its anchor with a sound like a staple releasing, and the whole unit swung out far enough for her to squeeze past. The door behind it was plain, interior grade, painted over once in a white that had yellowed, with a deadbolt above the knob. The deadbolt had no interior thumb turn. It locked from one side only, with a key, and the key she had taken from Gus fitted the way keys fit locks that were made for each other, smoothly, with no hesitation, the bolt drawing back in a single, clean quarter turn. The staircase was on the other side of the door, steep and straight. 11 steps, each tread a single piece of 1-inch oak that had been fitted and fastened with cut nails, the old square-shanked kind, which meant someone had built this staircase before wire nails became the standard, before the turn of the century perhaps, when the building was new. The treads were solid underfoot, no flex, no creak beyond a single low complaint from the 3rd step that resolved into silence as soon as her weight moved off it. She kept the flashlight aimed upward and went slowly, one hand on the wall because there was no railing, and at the top of the stairs the space opened out and she stopped inside the threshold and moved the light across what was in front of her. The room was the full width of the building and about half its depth, maybe 20 feet by 22, with a low ceiling that followed the pitch of the roof on the south side and leveled off at 8 feet on the north. 2 small windows, one on each end wall, had been shuttered from the inside with wooden panels fitted into the frames, not nailed but seated, which kept the weather out and the light out equally. The air was close and dry, the particular dryness of a sealed space in a building with a sound roof, and it carried a smell that was layered, cedar dominant, and beneath that something older, the smell of paper and fabric that has been undisturbed long enough to become a single unified scent rather than its component parts. It was not unpleasant. It was the smell of a place that had been put in order and closed and left, by someone who intended it to stay closed until it was time. There were 3 items in the room. Against the north wall, a wooden desk with 2 drawers on the right side, empty, the surface clear. On the desk, a kerosene lantern, clean, the reservoir visible through the glass and full, with a box of matches beside it, placed in alignment with the lantern's base in a way that was unmistakably deliberate. And in the center of the room, on the bare floorboards, a steamer trunk, and beside it a cedar chest. The 2 placed with a foot of space between them, both oriented the same direction, both closed. The trunk was old canvas over a wood frame, with leather corner pieces and 2 latches, the kind carried on ocean voyages in another era, the kind that appeared in attics and was always heavier than it looked. The cedar chest was smaller, a craftsman's piece, the lid fitted with hand-cut dovetail joints at each corner, the wood a deep reddish brown that had not faded, the grain running straight and clean. She lit the lantern first, because the flashlight was adequate but the lantern would be better, and because Delia had left it full and had left matches beside it, and this seemed like information about how Delia had intended this room to be entered. The lantern's light was warmer and more complete than the flashlight beam, filling the room evenly, and in that light the space settled into itself differently, became less like a place she was investigating, and more like a place she had been directed to, which was what it was. She opened the trunk first. Inside, ledgers, 16 of them, cloth-bound in a faded green, stacked in 2 columns. She lifted the top one and opened it to a random page and saw columns of dates and dollar amounts and initials, small, careful handwriting, every entry in the same hand. The ledgers went back, from what she could see at a glance, to the late 1960s. She set the one she had opened back on top of the stack and closed the trunk. The cedar chest had a small lock on the hasp, and she found after a moment of looking that it was not engaged, the shackle resting closed but not locked. The lock itself a formality rather than a barrier, as though Delia had decided at some point that anyone who made it this far had earned what was inside. The lid was tight in its frame from the wood's compression over years, and she lifted it with both hands and felt the seal release, and the scent of cedar came out strongly, the way it does when a chest has been properly made and properly kept. Inside, folded on top of everything else, was a sealed envelope, cream-colored, heavier stock, with Nora's full name written on the front in the same compressed cursive she had come to recognize as Delia's hand. Beneath the envelope, covering the full floor of the chest, were stacks of bills in paper bands, the bands printed with the name of a bank that had been absorbed into a larger institution years ago. She lifted one stack. The band read $1,000. She counted the stacks without removing them all, counting by column, measuring the depth of the chest against the height of the stacks. $61,400. She counted it again and got the same number. She sat back on her heels on the bare floorboards with the envelope in both hands, and the lantern light around her, and the cedar chest open in front of her, and the smell of the room, and the stillness of it, and the fact of what she was holding, pressing down on her in a way that was not unpleasant but was very heavy. The weight of having been chosen for something before you knew you needed to be. She wiped the back of her hand across her face. She pressed the envelope flat against the front of her coat. She sat like that for a while, not opening it yet, letting the room be what it was around her, letting the weight settle into something she could carry. Then she broke the seal. The letter was 4 pages, written front and back on the same cream stock as the envelope, in the same compressed cursive. The lines straight without the aid of ruling because Delia's hand did not need it. The date at the top of the first page was April 14th, 8 years prior, a Tuesday. Late in the afternoon, by the quality of light Nora imagined when she read it, though the letter did not say this. The salutation was plain. It read, "Dear Nora, no preamble, no apology for the strangeness of the situation. Just the name, and then the first sentence, and then everything that followed." The letter read, "I have been meaning to write this for some time and have kept finding reasons to wait. Which is not like me, but which I think you will understand by the time you reach the end of this. You do not know me well. We have met at funerals, which is not the ideal circumstance for becoming acquainted with a person, and I was not a woman who imposed myself on situations where I was not needed. I watched your family from a distance for many years. What I watched was not unusual for families, meaning it contained the full range of what families contain, the good and the painful, both. And I did not think it was my place to intervene in most of it, but I watched. That is what I want you to understand first. Someone was watching, and it was not a cold or indifferent watching. I knew your mother before she was your mother. We were not close in the way of people who speak often, but I knew her, and I knew what she was made of, and I know what she made. I closed the shop 11 years ago because my hands had begun to make certain tasks difficult, and because I had been running the shop for 34 years, and it was time. I do not say this with grief. 34 years is a complete thing. I want you to know that the shop was good to me, and I was good to it, and that most of what I have, which is what you are now holding, came from that work and from nothing else. I have lived carefully. I have not spent freely. These are not virtues I would recommend universally, but they suited my situation, and they produced the result you see in front of you, which is to say that a woman who ran a candy shop on a county road for 34 years was able to accumulate more than anyone who looked at the situation from the outside would have predicted. I mention this only because I want you to understand that the money is clean, and it is earned, and it is yours without complication. I have been giving money away quietly for a long time. The ledgers in the trunk will tell you more about this than I will in this letter, and I leave them to you not as an instruction, but as a record. In this town and in several towns nearby, there are people who received help at particular moments in their lives from a source they could not identify, and most of them did not try very hard to identify it because people who are in genuine need are often too busy managing the need to investigate its remedy. I paid a heating bill for a family on County Road 17 in the winter of 1981. I paid for 3 years of a young man's trade school in Millard County beginning in 1989. I paid a veterinarian's invoice for a farming family whose dog required surgery they could not afford, and without which they would have lost the dog, which would have been a small thing to some people, and was not a small thing to them. I am not telling you this to appear admirable. I am telling you because it is relevant to what I am asking you to do with the shop. I am not asking you to run a candy shop. That time is past, and I would not ask it. What I am asking you to consider, and I use that word deliberately, consider, not do, because I am not in a position to require anything of the dead and I would not wish to be, is whether the building might serve the purpose it always quietly served, which was to be a place where someone in a particular kind of difficulty could find something they needed without being asked to explain the difficulty first. The counter is long enough. The back apartment has a floor and a roof and running water and a furnace that was replaced in 1997. I am not prescribing. I am describing what the building has been and leaving it to you to decide what it will be next. Now I will tell you why you specifically. This is the part I have been working up to for 4 pages, because I am better at practical matters than at this kind of directness, which will perhaps not surprise you, given that you have never seen me be direct with anyone about anything personal. Your mother and I sat on my porch on a September evening in the year you turned 3, and she told me what your childhood was going to look like, meaning she described your father's situation and what it would mean for you and for her, and she was not asking for help. She was just speaking plainly to someone she trusted to listen without flinching. I listened. I said I would keep an eye on things. She said she appreciated it. We did not discuss it again, and she did not call in that promise because she was not the kind of person who called in promises. She relied on the promise being there and acted accordingly. I kept the eye on things. When she died, I kept it on you instead. I will not tell you everything I saw because some of what I saw was not mine to carry, and will not be yours to carry much longer either. What I will tell you is that what I saw was a person who had not been given much and had not been given to complaining about that fact, and who had continued to be in the face of a series of circumstances that would have bent a different person to a different shape. The thing her mother had made her. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is, in my experience, the thing most worth rewarding, which is also the thing least often rewarded in the ordinary course of events. I decided a long time ago that if I could do anything about that particular imbalance in one particular case, I would. There is one more thing. The welcome mat outside the front door was placed there 3 weeks ago by Gus Petrie at my request, delivered before I died through a letter I left him, which he will have followed because Gus follows through on things. I wanted there to be something that did not fit the neglect. I wanted you to see, before you opened the door, that someone had been there ahead of you and had meant to make it welcoming. I hope it was. I hope you are sitting somewhere warm now with the lantern lit. I hope the room smells like cedar. I imagine it does. Take your time with what comes next. You have earned the time. With affection and confidence, your great-aunt Delia Marsh. April 14th. Nora sat on the floorboards with the last page held in both hands for a long while after she finished. The lantern burned steadily. The room was warm enough and dry. She set the pages in order on the floor beside her, 1, 2, 3, 4, and pressed them flat with her palm. And then she folded them back along their original creases and returned them to the envelope and pressed the flap down with the side of her hand. She held the envelope against the front of her coat and looked at the cedar chest and the banded bills inside it and the closed steamer trunk and the 2 shuttered windows and the ceiling that followed the pitch of the roof that Delia had paid to replace 8 years ago so that the room would stay dry until someone came to open it. She sat like that without moving for a long time. The lantern did not waver. Warren Gill arrived on a Friday morning, 3 weeks after Nora's first visit to the shop. While she was on her knees in the front room pulling up a section of warped floorboard near the door with a flat pry bar and a wood chisel. She had been back twice since that first Tuesday, staying at a motel on Route 9 called the Caulfield Motor Inn. 9 rooms, $34 a night. The owner, a quiet man named Harold, who asked no questions and left clean towels on the step each morning without being asked. She had been working in the shop in the mornings and sitting with the ledgers in the evenings, reading through Delia's records in order from the earliest to the most recent, letting the picture build at its own pace. The warped board had been bothering her since the first day, the way a loose step bothers a person, and she had decided to address it before she addressed anything else. She heard the car before she heard anything else. A late-model sedan, the particular quiet of a vehicle that costs enough to insulate its occupants from road noise, pulling up outside and idling for a moment before the engine stopped. She set the chisel down on the floor beside her and stood, and the man who came through the open door was in his mid-50s, dressed in what she would later think of as careful, casual, khaki trousers and a fleece vest over a button shirt. The kind of clothes that say I am not in a suit on purpose. He had the build of a former athlete gone soft at the middle and comfortable with it. He looked around the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who has assessed a great many rooms and reduced the habit to a reflex. "You'd be Nora Callum," he said. His voice was pleasant, measured, the kind of voice trained to put people at ease through its evenness alone. He smiled when he said it, the smile of a man who knows that smiling first changes the temperature of a room. "Warren Gill. I'm in property acquisition and development, mostly rural commercial, mostly this part of the state." He held out his hand and she shook it, and he gave her a card, which was heavy stock with his name in raised lettering and a county seat address. "I heard the shop was in new hands. Thought I'd come introduce myself." She said nothing to that. She set the card on the top of the display case and picked up the chisel and turned it in her hand without doing anything with it, and she looked at him and waited. He did not seem troubled by the silence. He moved a few feet further into the room and looked at the display case and the Hobart and the apothecary jars the way Gus had looked at them, but differently. Gus had looked with recognition, and Warren Gill looked with calculation, measuring square footage and structural condition and market position. Simultaneously, a different kind of seeing entirely. He turned back to her and his expression was still pleasant, still easy. "I want to be straightforward with you," he said, which she noted was the kind of thing people say when they are about to be something adjacent to straightforward. "The building needs work. You can see that. The electrical is likely original Romex from the 60s. The plumbing in a building this age has usually got cast iron below the slab that's going to need addressing. And the commercial zoning on this block has some code questions that tend to add up when you start pulling permits." He paused to let this settle. "I can take all of that off your hands. I'd offer $38,000 for the property as is, cash close, 30 days. $38,000. She turned the number over once in her mind without showing anything on her face. The building had been appraised as part of the estate transfer at a figure considerably higher than that, and she knew it. And she suspected Warren Gill knew it too. He was not uninformed. He was offering $38,000 specifically because he had calculated what a young woman with no obvious resources and a property she had not asked for might accept if the offer were framed correctly. Which was to say, framed as a relief from difficulty rather than a diminishment of value. She understood the frame. She had been in enough difficult situations to recognize when someone was trying to position one around her. "I appreciate you coming by," she said. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She held the chisel loosely at her side and looked at him with an expression she had worked on over 19 years of needing to hold her own in rooms where someone had more leverage than she did. He did not say anything for a moment, reading her the way she was reading him, both of them making assessments that neither was going to share out loud. Then he nodded once, slowly, as though something had been confirmed. "The offer stands for 30 days, he said. "After that it adjusts for holding costs." He said this gently, the way you note a deadline without calling it a threat, which is itself a kind of threat, and they both knew that too. He took a last look around the room and then he went out, and she heard the sedan start and pull away, and she stood in the quiet of the shop for a moment before she went back to the floor and picked up the pry bar. She called Elwood Fitch that afternoon from the motel room. She told him about Warren Gill and the offer, and he listened without interrupting, and then he was quiet for a moment, and then he said he thought she ought to speak to someone else, and he gave her a name. The name was Price Dillard, an attorney in the county seat, younger than Fitch, who had recently handled a matter of some similarity and who Fitch believed would be useful to her. He said Price Dillard had a particular familiarity with small-town commercial property disputes, with the code violation framing that developers use to compress a seller's leverage, and with Harlan County's zoning board in specific. He said Price Dillard would know what $38,000 was worth, and what the building was worth, and the distance between those two numbers. Price Dillard drove out to Caulfield the following Tuesday in a 10-year-old Subaru wagon with a cracked rear mud flap and a parking permit from a law school hanging from the mirror. She was 31, with close-cropped hair and the kind of careful, unhurried manner that Nora associated with people who had learned to slow themselves down on purpose because their natural pace was faster than most situations required. She stood in the shop and turned in a slow circle looking at the room, and she said, without being prompted, that the electrical was not original Romex, that she could see from the outlet covers that it had been updated, probably GFCI throughout given the age, and that the code violation framing was a negotiating tactic rather than a legal reality. She said this the way you say something you have seen before and are not impressed by. She told Nora then, standing in the front room with the afternoon light coming through the gap at the boarded window, that she had come to Caulfield herself 18 months prior under circumstances that were not entirely dissimilar. She did not elaborate immediately, and Nora did not press her. She said only that she had stopped at the diner on Main Road because she had needed to and had not had enough money for what she ordered, and that the woman at the counter had refused payment and had also, without being asked, told her about a room above the hardware store that rented for very little to the right person. She had stayed 3 weeks. She had found her footing. She had left owing a debt to a town she had never planned to visit, and she had been looking for ways to repay it in the time since. Nora listened to this and did not say what it made her feel, which was something precise and specific that she had no clean word for, the feeling of a pattern becoming visible, of threads that had been separate revealing their connection. She pressed the heel of her hand to her sternum once, briefly, and then she let it drop. She asked Price Dillard what she thought they should do about Warren Gill, and Price Dillard said she thought they should make some calls, and that Warren Gill would find the ground less soft than he had assumed, and that there were people in this town and the surrounding towns who had things to say about Delia Marsh. If anyone thought to ask them, that would matter considerably to how this situation resolved. Price Dillard made 7 calls over the course of 2 days, and what came back from those calls was not what Warren Gill had anticipated. The first call went to the Harlan County Zoning Board, where Price had a working familiarity with the administrator, and where she established within 20 minutes that the property at 417 Main Road carried no outstanding code violations, that the commercial zoning was clean and current, and that the electrical had in fact been permitted and inspected in 2004. The update Delia had quietly arranged 8 years before she died, the same year she replaced the roof. The second call went to the county assessor, where the current valuation of the property sat at $112,000, a figure that Warren Gill's offer of $38,000 had not come within shouting distance of. The third call went to a contractor in Millard County who had done the roof work and who still had the invoice and the completion certificate in his files. After that, the calls shifted in character, moving away from documentation and toward people. And what the people said was what Price had suspected they would say. She spoke to a man on County Road 17 who had received an anonymous payment toward his heating oil in the winter of 1981 and who had never known until Price described the ledger entry where it had come from. He was quiet on the phone for a moment when she told him. Then he said he had always thought it might have been someone local and that he had tried to pay it forward when he could. She spoke to a woman whose son had attended trade school in Millard County on an anonymous scholarship beginning in 1989, who had built a career in HVAC and who now ran his own shop in the next county over. She spoke to a farming couple who had been unable to pay a veterinary invoice for a border collie named Patch in the spring of 1993, and who had found the bill marked paid when they called to arrange a payment plan, and who had kept that fact in the category of things that restore your faith without requiring explanation. Each of these people agreed, when Price asked to appear before the County Planning Commission at its next open session, where Warren Gill's preliminary application for a commercial development variance on the main road block was scheduled to be reviewed. The Planning Commission met on the second Thursday of the month in a room at the back of the county courthouse that held 40 seats and usually accommodated 12. On the second Thursday of April, it held 39 people, which was every seat filled, and one person standing at the back, which was Gus Petrie, who had declined a seat when one was offered and stood with his arms crossed and his back against the wall for the duration. Nora sat in the front row with Price Dillard beside her and the ledgers from the steamer trunk in a canvas bag at her feet. Warren Gill sat on the opposite side of the room in a chair he had arranged to be slightly apart from the others, which was either a lawyer's tactic or a habit and produced the same effect either way. He had brought a man with him who carried a folder and said nothing. What happened over the next 2 hours was not dramatic in the way that public confrontations are sometimes dramatic. There were no raised voices. There was no moment of sudden revelation. What there was instead was a steady accumulation of plain testimony, one person after another standing at the small lectern and saying, in their own words and at their own pace, what Delia Marsh had meant to them or to someone they knew, in a specific year, in a specific amount, at a specific moment of difficulty. The man from County Road 17. The mother of the HVAC contractor. The farming couple, now older, sitting close together in the middle of the room. A woman who had received 3 weeks of free lodging in the back apartment of the shop during a hard winter in 1986, when the shop had still been open, and Delia had simply unlocked the apartment door and handed her a key without making it a conversation. A retired schoolteacher who described receiving an envelope of cash, unsigned, slid under her door in the fall of 2001 when her property taxes had come due and her pension had not yet been adjusted. Warren Gill listened to all of this without visible distress. He was not a man who showed distress visibly, which was one of the things that made him effective at what he did, and also one of the things that made him difficult to read. When the testimony concluded and the commission chair opened the floor for applicant comment, he stood briefly and said that he had not been fully aware of the history of the property, and that he wished to withdraw his variance application pending further review of the site. He said this in the same pleasant, measured tone he had used in the shop 3 weeks prior. He sat down. His associate closed the folder. They left before the session adjourned, not hurriedly, just efficiently. 2 men with other appointments, retreating with the minimum surface area exposed. The commission chair noted the withdrawal for the record. The session continued with other business. Nora sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the wall. She opened the shop on the first Saturday of July, which fell that year on a morning of particular clarity. The air washed clean by 2 days of rain that had ended Friday night. The sky a color that had no adequate name in practical language. She did not open it as Marsh Confections. She had thought about a name for some weeks and had decided in the end not to give it one. Or not yet, because the building on Main Road had a reputation in the town that preceded any name she could put on it, and the reputation was the more important thing. She unlocked the padlock and removed it from the hasp and put it in her coat pocket and left the door open. She had spent 11 weeks on the interior, working mornings, and it looked now like itself. The floors refinished, the display case cleaned and backlit with a strip of warm-toned lighting she had wired herself after watching 3 instructional videos on GFCI circuit installation and consulting with Gus twice over his porch railing. The Hobart mixer had been serviced and bolted back to the right counter. The apothecary jars had been washed again and filled with things from the county farmer's market: dried beans, lentils, oats, sugar, flour, salt. The back counter held a coffee urn that she started each morning at 7 and kept going until it was gone. The back apartment she had furnished plainly: a bed with a wool blanket, a table with 2 chairs, a bathroom with clean towels on the rack and a bar of soap on the sink. The furnace had been inspected in May and certified. The key to the apartment hung on a hook inside the front counter on a plain ring. She had not posted a sign about the apartment. She had not explained its purpose to anyone except Price Dillard and Gus, and neither of them had required an explanation. The girl appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in the last week of October, when the light was going early and the temperature had dropped sharply since noon, and the maples along Main Road had gone to their full color, red and amber, and a particular orange that only lasts a week before it falls. She came through the open door the way people come through doors when they are not sure of their welcome, one shoulder forward, weight still partly on the threshold, ready to be redirected. She had a single backpack, the kind with a frame, loaded full, and she wore a jacket that was not adequate for the weather. She looked at the room and then at Nora behind the counter, and she said she had seen the light on and had thought she might ask if there was anything she could do for a meal. She was 19, maybe 20. She had the particular quality of stillness that settles on people who have been moving for a long time and have learned not to let their fatigue show until they are somewhere it is safe to show it. Nora looked at her for a moment. Then she turned to the small kitchen at the back of the counter, which she had installed in May with a 2-burner unit and a half-size refrigerator and a shelf of canned goods and dry goods measured out from the apothecary jars. And she ladled soup into a bowl from the pot that had been on the low burner since morning, and she set the bowl on the counter with a spoon and a piece of bread on the side. She said nothing about payment. She did not ask where the girl had come from or where she was going. She set the bowl down and stepped back and let the girl come the rest of the way through the door. Later, after the girl had eaten and Nora had shown her the back apartment and left the key on the table without ceremony, Nora stood at the front window of the shop in the early evening and looked out at Main Road. The maples were dark shapes now against a sky going deep blue at the edges. Gus's porch light was on across the road. The grain elevator caught the last of the light on its upper corrugated panels and held it for a moment and then let it go. She had left the mat at the front door where Delia had asked Gus to place it, and she had bought a second one and placed it at the back apartment door, and she intended to keep both of them there as long as she kept the building. It is not a complicated thing to leave a light on and a door unlocked for someone who needs it. It only feels complicated from the outside. From the inside, it feels exactly like what it is: the most ordinary form of keeping a promise to someone who is no longer there to see it kept.